It sneaks up on you in a galloping, foaming flash of midnight black sheen and eyes alight like fireballs. A massive canine who, standing on four legs, can look you straight in the eyes. It doesn't bark, doesn't even raise a lip to bear the faintest glimmer of blade-sharp teeth, for its presence alone is enough to convey the message. Down this path lies evil, a brush with the curling, lashing tendrils of damnation on the outermost rim of hell. It might sound like a countryside spook of the old world, but you're in New York City, Staten Island to be exact. Today on American Strangeness, the Black Demon Dog of Bull's Head. Today, Signs Road is a half-mile stretch in the Bull's Head neighborhood of Staten Island, dotted with houses and businesses. For much of its length, Signs Road borders the 814-acre William T. Davis Wildlife Refuge, once a notorious dumping ground for the dismembered victims of mobster Tommy Karate Patera. In the days leading up to the Revolutionary War, the area was known simply as the Signs, and was associated with danger, omens, and superstition. Incidentally, the refuge is named after Staten Island naturalist, entomologist, and historian William T. Davis, who recorded some of the lore about the Signs. A mysterious black dog, as large as a horse, was said to frequent the Signs. At night, it would appear beside horseback riders and trot along with them. In one instance, a black man was riding with a broadaxe in hand when the dog materialized next to him. The man had the boldness to strike a terrific blow, but the dog vanished from beneath the axe, and it fell to the ground. Bull's Head and its ominous lore trace back to the Bull's Head Tavern, a long, low, shingle-sided building that was built in 1741 and twice enlarged before the Revolution. It stood at the northeast corner of the intersection of what became the Richmond Turnpike and the road leading from Port Richmond to New Springville, which today is Victory Boulevard and Richmond Avenue. Years before, the locality was known as London Bridge. A large sign used to swing in front of the tavern. According to J.J. Clute, some rustic artist had evidently exhausted all his talents and resources in transmitting to posterity the picture of a very fierce-looking bull's head, with very short horns and very round eyes, which looked very much like a pair of spectacles. As put by New York City historian Frank Bergen Kelly, the tavern was the scene of many outrages. The Bull's Head Tavern gained notoriety as a headquarters for the Tories, colonists loyal to the British Crown during the Revolution era. It was managed by a feared criminal named Bartley and a man named Hatfield who was related to the leader of the Tory gang, which is said to have murdered, robbed, and plundered anyone that happened to be in their way. It is no exaggeration to claim that at least a dozen murders were committed in the old Bull's Head Tavern by the Hatfield gang, wrote Ira K. Morris in 1893. Wrote Morris, according to tradition, the history of each murder or robbery was written on the board partitions of the dingy barroom, and orgies that would put to shame the most fiendish of Indians were held therein. Every device imaginable was resorted to entice unsuspecting people into the house, and it generally depended upon their skill and courage to get out alive. The stories of the depredations committed by the Hatfields in this old house sound more like fiction than truth. Once the British departed Staten Island, the climate became very warm for the Hatfields, wrote Morris, and they moved cautiously, but the family persisted in the area. One particularly grisly account of violence that occurred involving the Bull's Head Tavern during the Revolutionary War period was revealed in an interview with a Mrs. Blake, who was born near Bull's Head. Blake, who was Ms. Merrill during the events described, recalled that a number of Americans had come over from the Jersey Shore one day and were making merry at the tavern. At dinner time, an English officer stopped by the house of Merrill's father. The ruffles of the soldier's uniform were stained with blood, and the man explained that he had killed half a dozen drunken Americans. Blake remembered seeing a black woman covering one of the dead bodies with brush. After the war, stated Clute, the Bull's Head Tavern became known as a gambling den. He wrote, "Some fearful stories were sometimes told of the place and its frequenters, especially of one of them, who was a mysterious character, whom everybody desired to avoid, but who could not be avoided. Sometimes he appeared as a man of exceedingly dark complexion, but with fiery eyes. That he had a hoof and a tail, nobody doubted, though nobody had actually seen them. Sometimes he would present himself in the shape of a huge black dog, or other forms as his fancy dictated, but he always remained until the party broke up, and then accompanied some one of them on the way home, never speaking by the way, because no one dared to address him, and all attempts to escape from him by speed proved utterly ineffectual. At length, so great became the terror which his frequent visits inspired, that the house was entirely forsaken by those who had patronized it, and then the mysterious visitor forsook it too. We allude to these stories because they were once inseparably connected with the place, and half a century ago implicitly credited by people generally. Owing to its poor reputation, Staten Islanders attempted, in a quiet manner, to burn down the Bull's Head Tavern on multiple occasions. But the flames were extinguished as often as the torch was applied, wrote Morris. One attempt at arson was during anti-royalist celebrations on the island, but the blaze was subdued, charred boards were replaced with freshly hewn local timbers, and the tavern returned to business as usual. It eventually became a popular relay station on the coach route between New York and Philadelphia. Travelers from all over the country would stop at all hours to exchange their horses, eat sumptuous meals, and listen to tales of the tavern's dreadful history as a Tory headquarters. Fire finally did take the Bull's Head Tavern, but not until February 28, 1871. The conflagration consumed the old tavern that night, along with the building attached to it and the house and grocery store across the street. The Bull's Head property was owned at that time by Robert D. Vrooms and insured for $1,500 by a New York company. An incendiary was suspected to have been the cause, suggesting the demise of the Bull's Head Tavern was no accident. Bull's Head was no stranger to fires, though. After one particularly destructive event, townspeople attempted to rename the locality Phoenixville, because these houses, perhaps, will someday arise from their ashes, wrote Clute. As late as 1958, the famous Bull's Head Tavern sign was said to still exist, preserved at Minden, a 1913 Craftsman Mediterranean-style estate in Bridgehampton, New York. It is of little surprise that frightening tales of a supernatural presence manifested around the Bull's Head Tavern. After all, there was no more wretched hive of scum and villainy on 18th century Staten Island. A collision of unsavory elements, a disdained pro-British element, mugging, murder, gambling, and God knows what other depravities, made it a place to be feared and avoided by the general public. Did legends of the Black Dog arise as a warning to passers-by, signs wrote obtaining its name based on such spectral portents? Or did the dastardly doings at the Bull's Head Tavern draw the devil himself to revel in the debauchery? Allegedly, the Black Dog of Bull's Head continued to be spotted in later years. Sarah Comstock, penning a whimsical travelogue of Staten Island in a 1916 edition of the New York Times, wrote, "Back to Richmond Turnpike, and walk west along its broad smoothness to Old Stone Road, the terminus of the trolley. Here stood the old Bull's Head Tavern, gone, alas, this many a day. But no one who knows the lore of this spot can visit it without feeling a throb of the old superstition that was so long connected with the famous hostelry. Today a modern roadhouse stands upon the corner and displays a sign of a bull's head, but only a modern, or comparatively modern, attempt to duplicate the old one of tradition. But I have heard it whispered that even within recent years the great black dog has been seen, the dog as large as a horse and with eyes of fire, lurking on a black midnight around these premises, or at least a convivial patron of the roadhouse was sure that he had seen the dog and heard his growl like warning thunder." Ichabod Crane, the career military officer whose name Washington Irving borrowed for the superstitious schoolmaster in the legend of Sleepy Hollow, kept his retirement home during the early 1850s on what is now 3525 Victory Boulevard, near Science Road. One of his neighbors was Theodore Roosevelt Sr., father of the future president. Crane's house, despite attempts to save it, was demolished in 1989 to make way for commercial buildings. Irving had little connection to Staten Island, so it is oddly serendipitous that the real Ichabod Crane would settle in a place rife with dark lore so reminiscent of the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow. Crane is buried nearby in the Asbury Methodist Cemetery. Another Revolutionary War era legend from New York, this one from the Catskill region, depicts the black dog as an alternate form of the devil. Old Scratch would find himself up against pious Calvinist dominie Johannes Schoenemann, a name about which more legends and stories have clustered than about all the other inhabitants of Greene County combined, wrote historian C.G. Hine in 1906. The parsonage made famous by the good man is gone, as is the church building from whose pulpit were thundered weekly anathemas against the Tories and all other enemies of the country, as well as of the Lord, he wrote. Schoenemann's clergy circuit included both Catskill and Coxsackie, 12 miles north, as well as Catsbon, 10 miles south. In both directions, the road passed through dense woods, and the dominie always carried his gun during these travels. In fact, he must have had the appearance, at least, of belonging to the church militant, being intensely hated by the Tories because of his strong condemnation of their attitude, wrote Hine. His rifle never left his side during the days of the Revolution, it even going into the pulpit with him. And as he was a dead shot and his enemies were acquainted with his proficiency, he was seldom or never molested. In his 1906 book, The West Bank of the Hudson River, Albany to Tappan, Hine recorded a legend about Schoenemann and a black dog from Elsie Newkirk, 87, who was blind and confined to a chair, but still loved a merry tale. This story was current in her youth. According to Elsie, on one occasion, when the dominie was proceeding on horseback to Coxsackie, he glanced behind to discover a great black dog attached to his horse's tail. His rifle was, of course, his companion on this occasion, as at all times, but for such attacks as this, the good man was armed with a better weapon than ever carried powder and ball. For, looking the ferocious beast in the face for a full minute, he thundered out, "If you are from the Lord, remain where you are. If from the devil, be gone," and instantly the beast vanished into thin air. Those were rough days, when the traveler must be prepared to meet the devil himself, as well as his minions, the Indians and wildcats. The dominie had faced down the Prince of Darkness himself, and won. I've talked previously about how spectral haunts from Europe followed emigrants to their new homes in America. The Blissville Banshee, which is the first video I ever posted on this channel, spooked Irish settlers on Long Island, and phantom coaches from the UK remanifested as automobiles when the horseless vehicles quickly became a fixture on American roads. Phantom dogs were no different, migrating from their stomping grounds in the British and greater European countryside to roam the modern metropolitan streets of the burgeoning United States. Even New York City, the shining beacon of urban progress, wasn't safe from the dark, growling ghosts of old.